Hello, everyone. Welcome to Auvik's To Protect and Secure, Selling Cybersecurity as a Service with a really special guest from Datto. Just a couple of housekeeping notes just while we get started. The webinar today will be recorded and it'll be made available in just a couple hours on auvik.com/franklymsp, alongside a bunch of our blogs and podcasts that are aimed to really help MSPs like you grow your business. To ask a question, feel free to do so anytime during the entire webinar. Myself and my awesome colleague Sam will be helping to moderate some of these questions throughout the presentation, and really aiming to really make this as interactive as possible. I think that'll be really get the biggest bang out of this by making this interactive and asking some questions, and we can definitely go back and inject some of those questions during the presentation as well. So just on the agenda today, we'll be going through a couple of these pieces, and today we'll be chatting specifically with Tayler Feigl, who's a channel development manager for the APAC region at Datto. And what she's going to be doing is helping us hear some really key findings about Datto's annual State of the Channel Ransomware Report, the result of interviewing over 100,000 small to medium businesses around the globe, specifically looking at ransomware, how it affected them, how it affected their business. And you're going to take a look and learn what your peers are doing around the globe, but also specifically in the ANZ and Australia region, and doing to protect, to prepare, and to recover against ransomware. And also to talk about investigating how you can use these findings to help sell some cybersecurity as a part of your managed service offering. So today I'm your host, Patrick Albert, AVP of Product Management here at Auvik Networks. Been in the MSP space for about 15 or 16 years, been quite a few times down to Australia. Absolutely love it there and looking for a good excuse to come back soon. And so, for my history, I've been started out in tech support, kind of done some sales, but really been going into product management, and because I've really been keen and interested in understanding how can we help the MSP market deliver the best service to their customers. So anyways, with that, as I mentioned, I'm also joined by our guest Tayler, who'll be driving basically the majority of the presentation, and I'll be jumping in with some comments. So I guess without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand the presentation over to you, Tayler.
I guess good morning for everyone over in ANZ region, if there is anyone across the pond in Canada or the US. Good evening to you guys as well. But Pat already did a pretty good intro. My name's Tayler, Channel Development Manager for Datto, based out in the Sydney office in Australia. Started with Datto 2.5 years ago, back when there was 6 of us. And I think as of yesterday, we just hired our 50th employee in the ANZ region. So it's been a super exciting journey being a part of the Oz team out here. And before that, I had a little stint in Hong Kong working for a mobile wallet startup out there. So I just really love being a part of the team and growing, Datto into the Asia Pacific market, just because it is, as we'll know of those on the call in Oz, it's really different to the US and Europe as well. So it's been a really interesting journey, but a lot of stuff I want to get through today. So I want to kick off straight away. Pat already covered off the agenda, but I want to have a little look at the ANZ data on security breaches for 2018. So the government's released some awesome reports since we've implemented the notifiable data breach scheme out here. So I want to look at that quickly, and then we'll jump into some of the industries and verticals most targeted, forecasts of where we think ransomware is going, some good ransomware stories throughout. And then a couple opportunities that we're kind of seeing specifically out in ANZ that our partners are jumping on today at the moment, with some trends that are happening. And then we'll finish off with some key takeaways, and I'll throw it back over to Pat. But feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. Like, I'm more than happy to stop the presentation and ask questions if it's relevant at the time. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll have some time at the end to answer any questions or have a chat around anything that was discussed in the prezo. And just before I do get started, I'm more than happy to share this deck with anyone on the call. So at the end, if you just want to shoot me an email at tay@datto.com, I'm more than happy to share this with you. There might be some good content you can use with your own teams, or even maybe pass on to your clients as well. But in terms of this presentation today, I kind of want to look at 3 different buckets, which we think, you know, brings this whole ransomware story together. So we're going to look quickly at some of the regulations that we're seeing, the security aspects as well, so the actual ransomware and the hard data on that. And then we're also going to kind of look at the SMB piece as well, so how complex it's starting to get for, you know, the businesses that you work with to keep up with everything that's going on. So jumping, you know, straight into regulations, globally, we're seeing that nations are starting to implement, you know, laws and schemes and different things around data protection and privacy and security. It's a long time coming, and, you know, Australia definitely jumped on that last year with releasing the notifiable data breach scheme back in Feb. Shortly after, you know, we saw the GDPR out in Europe, which can affect, you know, Australian businesses as well and New Zealand businesses. But in the Asia Pacific region, we're also seeing, you know, the Philippines implemented a Data Privacy Act. China now has cybersecurity laws. Singapore has a Cybersecurity Act as well. So it's definitely a global trend. And, you know, when I speak to our partners in New Zealand, their prediction is that they're going to have something very similar in the next 12 months. So these global regulations that are kind of popping up everywhere are something that we're seeing, you know, across the world. And personally, I think it's a great thing to ensure that we have things at a government level to ensure that companies are doing the best that they can to protect their data. It's one thing for us to, you know, be helping our clients and businesses protect data, but I would also personally, as, you know, a user and a consumer, want to know that, you know, if my data's been lost or hacked, you know, what's happening with it. So this is a snapshot of some of the regulations that are currently out and about globally, and the highlighted ones are some more in the APAC region.
Yeah, and Taylor, just to jump in, I think that's a really awesome slide, because I think that this covers a really interesting topic for MSPs today. You know, as you mentioned, lots of these different compliances are popping up around the world. And, you know, the US is probably going to be introducing a couple. Here in Canada, we're introducing some. You know, and I think this is a great opportunity for MSPs to really help their customers with cybersecurity, because so I've been dealing with quite a few companies that are trying to take on customers, you know, that have offices around the world. You know, just as an example, I was talking to a customer not that long ago that is taking on a customer whose main office is out in Brisbane, but that company is looking at opening up an office in Frankfurt. You know, and I think really good opportunity here for MSPs to really position themselves as the experts in understanding what that means to the company. You know, does that mean they have to now adopt some practices from GDPR or other things? So I think this is just one of the jumping, because I think this is a really exciting opportunity. You know, as you mentioned, this is a great trend and really protects the user, but also translates into a great opportunity for the MSP to be the expert as to, you know, helping those companies open up offices around the world and understand the implications to them.
Yeah, definitely. And with the GDPR, it doesn't just stop at the European borders. So, you know, even if you are based in Australia or New Zealand or America, it doesn't matter. If you're, you know, having goods or services being shipped to the EU, or you have any individual European data, whether it's held in Australia or Europe, you know, you kind of fall under that. So, yeah, getting an understanding on that and being able to educate your customers, definitely a great opportunity for MSPs. So, with the NDB that came into effect in February last year, I do just want to quickly have a look at some of the stats that have come out of that. For one of the first times ever, the government has actually done an absolutely fantastic job in taking all of the data that's come in from the breaches and putting them into quarterly reports that are posted onto the government website. So I've got the URL right at the bottom there. If you haven't had a look, I highly recommend it. A lot of these graphs that you're about to see and pie charts and whatnot, I've literally dragged and dropped from the reports that they've got online. They're really easy and digestible, something that you could literally download and send to your clients. So that's definitely something I recommend having a look at. But if we have a look at the quarters, it's broken down by quarter, Q1 to Q4 last year, 2018. There was a total of 812 breaches actually that had to be notified to the government. Now you'll see in Q1 it was quite low. That's when the laws just came into effect. But then once everyone started to wrap their heads around it, it jumped immediately in Q2, 3, and 4 up into the couple hundreds every quarter that had to be actually reported to the Australian government that they've been hacked or that there's been human error and data's been breached. But I think what's really interesting is the actual breakdown that they provide of, where are these breaches coming from? A lot of people, and especially a lot of businesses, might just think that, breaches might only happen if we're actually hacked. If some sort of criminal tries to hack us, or we get ransomware or crypto or whatever it might be. But the reality is a lot of these breaches actually are coming internally from employees. One of the biggest threats to your business is yourself, funnily enough. So it's really great to be able to sit down with your customers and kind of show them these statistics from an ANZ, like a national level, saying that, yes, we need to make sure that we're protecting or doing all that we can against the threat of ransomware and crypto and the cyber aspect. But in saying that as well, we really also need to cover and understand that some of these breaches are actually coming internally. Maybe someone accidentally shares something they shouldn't have. Maybe you've gotten a malicious employee. You didn't grant their holiday leave, so now they're taking over. And a very, very few % of data breaches are actually coming from system errors in the technology itself. So this is just a quick breakdown of kind of where all of the reported breaches were coming from. And if we jump on to the next slide, this is the kind of information that's being, lost or stolen or they can't find anymore. And it's quite interesting to see that, yes, a lot of general contact information is stolen in these breaches. So it might be your name, your phone number, your address even, but then it goes even further, your financial details, your bank account details, your identity information. So think of everything that's on a passport, your mother's maiden name, all those things that we use to verify our identity. Health information. So the Red Cross Blood Bank was hacked last year. So, blood types, financial records, of potential diseases that different people have, sensitive data that's kind of being taken, as well as tax file numbers, and then a full range of things. So, when these breaches are happening, it might not just be the contact information that they might be thinking of. Sometimes the data is a lot more sensitive than that. And it's really great to be able to, once again, go to your customers and show the kind of information that could potentially be compromised if they don't take certain steps to protect themselves. And I did want to break out the cyber incident part. That's why we're here today. We want to talk more about that. And I've only shared the statistics on this page from Q4. So I just want to look at the most relevant stats from 2018. But on the left-hand side, you'll see the malicious or criminal attack breakdown. So that includes human error. You'll see, there's the rogue employee or insider threat. There's the loss of a data storage device. So literally someone may be leaving a USB key somewhere that they shouldn't have and exposing data that way. But as you'll see, that bottom row, the cyber incident, is definitely the largest threat there. And on the right-hand side with the pie chart, it's an awesome breakdown of how these cyber criminals or how these threats are actually getting into the business. So the biggest chunk, the red part on the right-hand side, is the phishing emails. So 43% of all cyber incidents that happened and that were reported in Australia in Q4 were via a phishing email. And I'm personally not surprised by that. I got one of the emails from the Australian Post telling me that I had a package to pick up from the post office, and I just had to give them my name, my number, and my email. I couldn't remember anything that I'd ordered online that was being delivered, so I didn't, obviously enter that information in, but then it turns out it was a large phishing attack going, Australia-wide. So we're going to talk about that there's a huge opportunity there to be training staff and employees around, what to look out for in emails and how to, pick up dodgy emails. But in saying that, there's still a percentage of businesses that are just being hacked, just brute force hacking, someone deciding we want to hack your business and just doing everything that they can to infiltrate it, cases of malware. And then, of course, there's always a chunk of other, like we just don't have the system, the business didn't have the systems and processes in place to be able to determine how they were even hacked. So that pie chart to me is something that you could be sending to your customers to just help educate and bring up that level of awareness of the different ways that cyber criminals are operating to try and steal this kind of data. And once again, I just took these graphs directly from the NDB reports that they're releasing every quarter. So it's definitely something you could quickly take yourself, chop and change, put it in an email and send out to your customers. Now, in terms of the sectors, I've listed out the top 5. So number 1 was health and service providers were the most targeted, followed by finance, legal, accounting and management, education, and then finally mining and infrastructure. So health and service providers are a big one. I know a lot of our partners deal with health and service providers, or even third parties that deal with health and service providers. I've got a great little case study right at the end of this presentation of something that happened this morning that flew across my radar from one of our reps internally. But on the right-hand side, you'll see the breakdown between the human error and the actual criminal attacks. And the reason I keep bringing up this human error piece is that, especially at Datto, we want to tell the whole story. Like, there's a big part of it that is criminal and it's cybercrime and it's online and it's scary, but you can't forget the piece where, you know, the biggest threat to your business is the people in the business. Even if it is a phishing attack, it takes someone in your business to actually click on that link. So being able to share this kind of knowledge with your customers and just help them understand that, you know, the biggest threat to their business is themselves, and also understanding the kind of split. Like, if you have customers right now that are in any of those top 5 sectors, you should be telling them about it. Like, you know, this isn't just information we've pulled from nowhere. This is like, you know, the Australian government putting together these reports of the most targeted industries. It's super awesome content information that you can just grab from online. And another great piece of this is, you know, for the past couple of years for us as an industry, you know, vendors and MSPs, we've been talking about this ransomware story to the point sometimes I have to go to Rob Ray being like, I feel like I'm just talking about this all the time. Like, surely there's something else that we should be talking about. But the reality is, you know, between us, the MSPs and the vendors, we know, and we know that ransomware is a big threat. We know that human error is a big threat. But the thing is, end users just still don't see it. They don't understand how large of an issue this is. But the good thing for us, especially out in ANZ, with these new regulations that have come in place, we're seeing, you know, names and companies that we know and love being breached. And these are now on the news. They're in the papers. I couldn't believe that Bunnings, my favorite place to go get a sausage sizzle from, was hacked. Optus, Big W, the Hawthorn Footy Club. I was thinking today, actually, if you're looking for a new niche for business, maybe it's providing cybersecurity services to the Australian Football League. Like, it's not just big companies that are being hacked. It is your local surf life-saving club. It's your local real estate agent. And I guess one positive of, you know, these laws and regulations that we have now in ANZ is that we can start putting real businesses that we know and love and grown up with and see that in the news. So rather than it becoming something that we just know is a big issue, it really is starting to finally switch in the end user and the consumer's mind as well. And, you know, these are definitely the kinds of things that you should be talking about with your customers, because they know everyone in Australia knows what Bunnings is, or Big W. You probably go there once a week, or, you know, if you're an AFL supporter, that's something that you can relate to rather than thinking, oh, you know, Facebook's been hacked, but they're a multi-billion-dollar company. And all of this you can grab online, once again, from the government website. So as of Monday, I just like to try and include relevant stories. So, you know, Monday this week, our Prime Minister had to come out and say that, you know, Australia's major political party was hit by a cyber incident. That was all across the news. It was in the papers. You know, mum and dad sitting at home, brothers and sisters, it was on their radar. And they're still looking into what it was and how they infiltrated it. But anyone who follows the Batuta Advocate, we already know that it's because they didn't update their Norton internet security. I always remember at school growing up, those little pop-ups that would show around having to update your internet security. But I thought that was pretty funny. They're right onto it. They come out, you know, within minutes of these stories going live with really funny takes on it. So if you don't follow the Batuta Advocate, I highly recommend it. And, you know, with big attacks like this coming out, it makes government officials also have to come out and say how important cybersecurity is. So our Information Commissioner coming out and saying that, you know, preventing data breaches and improving cybersecurity must be a primary concern for any organisation entrusted with people's personal information is huge. She's pretty much sending a signal that, you know, this has to be a #1 priority, not just for the government, but any business in Australia. And if someone in the group chat can name one business that doesn't deal with people's personal information, I'd love to hear it, because if you're employing someone, you're dealing with their personal information. If you have a loyalty program, you're dealing with people's personal information. So this is pretty much a nationwide kind of comment around how cybersecurity has to be the #1 focus going into 2019. So if you didn't get a screenshot right at the start, I've just put this here quickly. If you want to take a quick screenshot of this URL, this will take you directly to those reports and all of this awesome information. There's a lot more of it, a lot more graphs broken out by industry and whatnot. Can't go through all of it today, but I highly recommend jumping in and having a look. Super valuable that you can chop and change and send straight out to your customers and help educate them as to what's happening. And if you don't follow the Batuta Advocate, it is absolutely hilarious, and I highly recommend you start following them as well. Okay, cool. So that wraps up the regulations piece. We're going to jump straight into security unless there was a question or anything on the regulations. I think we might.
No, we're good to continue.
Okay. All right, awesome. So straight into the security piece. Now, this is where some of the ransomware statistics start to come up from our global ransomware reporting that we do every year. So to us, it's no surprise that cyber attacks are up 33% in 2018. Now, for your customers, that might not mean a whole lot to them. The statistic that we really need to be pounding home with all the end users and SMBs that we talk to is that 60% of all of the attacks last year were aimed at SMBs, which is huge. So the whole story with this is that attacks are on the rise, and not only are these attacks on the rise, they're aimed towards the SMB market. It's the whole, you know, cast out a net and try and hit 100 small businesses, or work really hard to try and infiltrate one large business that would have the funding and the expertise to have systems and processes in place to prevent exactly that. So when you're talking to your customers, you know, it's one element of it is helping them understand, but like, this is scary stuff. And if they're not doing something to protect themselves, you know, it's a part of our job to help them understand why they need to be doing something. And a great way to do that, I'd almost say the best way to do that, is through storytelling. You know, it's one thing to come out and say 60% of all attacks are aimed at SMBs and ransomware attacks are on the rise. They went up 30% last year. But if you can start giving them actual stories from, you know, either your own experiences as an MSP or stories that I share with you today, it's a lot easier to relate to that than just to, you know, try and think about all the numbers as well. Sharing the types of ransomware, I think, is always an interesting thing as well, as there's so many different strains out there these days. Popcorn time's been a classic favorite of mine. You know, you're infiltrated with ransomware. There's the easy way and the hard way to get your data back. The easy way, pay the ransom. The hard way, send the ransomware to 2 of your mates, and if they both infiltrate themselves with ransomware, you'll get your data back for free. So these guys are getting pretty creative in how they spread the different strains of ransomware. You know, so unless you have a list of people who have double-crossed you, you know, these things are getting really, really, really interesting to watch, to be honest. And for anyone who's never listened to like a Datto webinar or isn't familiar with Datto, one of the biggest things we always tell our partners, never pay the ransom. So don't even consider paying the ransom, because what you're doing is you're telling the partner or the hacker that, 1, you value your data, and 2, that you've got money to pay for it as well. So we guarantee that 1 month, 3 months, 6 months from now, they're just going to come back and hit you again. You know, Fat Boy, it determines your ransomware payment dependent on how much a Big Mac costs in your city. So if a Big Mac's more expensive in your town, the ransomware is going to be more expensive as well. N-ransom, ransomware where they don't want money. They actually want you to send them 10 naked photos of yourself to an email, and then they'll give you your data back for free. And from all the reading we do on this, apparently they then go and sell that on the dark web. So like the different ways that these guys are putting together ransomware and the request is really growing and expanding, even to the point where there's now educational ransomware. And what I mean by that is this strain of ransomware, rather than them wanting you to pay them any money, they actually want to give you a slap on the wrist and say, hey, what the hell? Like, why'd you click on this link? It was obviously ransomware. If you want to get your data back, you have to read these 2 educational pieces on phishing emails and how to avoid ransomware. That's probably one of my favorite ones that's popped up at the moment. They want to punish you for infecting yourself by learning more about how to not infect yourself in the future. It's quite a good one. And on top of that, with the Internet of Things and how everything's becoming more connected, these hackers and the way that they're infiltrating your network's environments is starting to become really, really complex. In that, this story is fantastic, that a casino in the US, in one of their fish tanks, had a Wi-Fi enabled thermometer in the fish tank to monitor the temperature of the fish tank and keep it at its optimal levels. These hackers were able to get into the network via this IoT thermometer and were able to steal a whole heap of high rollers information. So really obscure, but it's just a way to demonstrate that, it's not just going to be the same old, same old. You need to stay on your feet with this kind of stuff, because the ways that they're infiltrating environments is just expanding every day. So as I would have covered in the first half, the ransom and cyber security aspect is such a big piece, but we can't forget about the human error, because those two combined was 75% of all data breaches in Australia last year. And this is an absolutely awesome story to tell. So I don't know if you guys remember, but in January last year, if you were in Hawaii, you would have gotten this text message that said, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. And funnily enough, one of our guys from the office happened to be in Hawaii on a family holiday with his wife and kids. Why the first thing he did was send us a screenshot of the message that he'd just gotten, we'll never understand, but I'm so happy that he did, just because it was an absolutely crazy situation from what he said. Like, people were going absolutely manic in hotels, people were ditching their cars on the highway, and this went on for 40 minutes. People thought that there was a ballistic missile inbound and that essentially they were all, gonna die. Now, 40 minutes later, another message goes out and says, what's the word? False alarm, no ballistic missile inbound, repeat, false alarm. So obviously great that there's not a ballistic missile inbound, but then they did a huge inquiry into how these messages went out in the first place. It wasn't a planned thing, obviously. So as they're doing all of their investigation, trying to figure out how the hell this message was sent out, and it took them 40 minutes to rectify that it wasn't actually a real military situation that was happening, they were obviously going through every single employee in that company, and they come across this guy who works in the tower over in Hawaii, and they're going through his social media accounts, and he's just loving his life, loving his job. And when you really look at this photo, you realize he's got his password on a Post-it note stuck to his computer. So this is just a great example of humans being humans. And, it doesn't look malicious or anything like that, but sometimes we just don't know any better. There's always the element of human error. And it's really just important to kind of communicate that as much as it is the ransomware story. Now, from our research and the reporting that we do every year, we found that the cost of business downtime is actually 10 times greater than the cost of the ransom requested. So if your business is hit with ransomware and they're requesting $300, the cost of the downtime is probably going to cost you $3,000 or more. So when we talk about the downtime, we mean yourself, your employees not being able to access critical systems. Your customers might not be able to go online and access your services. So you're losing revenue on your customer side. You're losing revenue internally because you've still got to pay your employees even though they can't do anything. And on top of all of that, you're losing brand perception as well. If someone goes to your website and it's down and it's just all those, dashes and numbers and letters, that looks really bad for your brand as well. And it's going to cost 10 times more than whatever the ransom is that they've requested. So that's a really good statistic to have ready for your customers if you're ever in there talking about, upgrading their managed service contract or trying to get them to switch over to a better, newer product, and they're pushing back on costs. It's always great to remind them that, hey, we're doing this because it's the best thing that we can do to protect you from cybercrime and ransomware. And you know what? If we don't do this and you are hit, it's going to cost you 10 times more than that anyway. It's just a really great little statistic to have on you to be able to have those discussions, especially when you start to talk about maybe price and you're getting some pushback. And another really, really awesome statistic that came out of this, and I'm going to talk about it in the opportunity section, is that one of the key reasons that we're seeing more and more successful ransomware attacks is due to the lack of cybersecurity education that's out there. So, lack of education around phishing emails, what they look like, what you should look out for, malicious websites, clickbait, web ads, what to click on, what not to click on the internet. And it might seem basic for us because we're doing this day in, day out. I know internally at Datto, we have cybersecurity training for staff, but I can guarantee my mum or my grandma or even my siblings, if they get one of those silly emails that says, oh, you've just won $500, give me your bank details to claim your prize, like there's a chance that one of them probably does it just because they don't know any better and this isn't their life that they're living every day, whereas we're just so in the midst of it that sometimes we forget that, spotting out a simple phishing email isn't something that everyone can do. So this is a huge opportunity for MSPs to capitalize on, being able to deliver that educational training. And I'm going to circle back to that in a few moments once we get to the opportunity section. And I guess I want to point out as well that, Datto does do this report every year, and we talk to SMBs and SMBs and MSPs to grab all this data, but it's completely backed up when we now compare it to the government data that's coming out as well. They're saying that the biggest way that ransomware infiltrations are happening are through phishing. They're through malware and they're through ransomware, which is exactly what we're seeing. So now it's kind of like all of the different information is all coming together and it all aligns, and we're telling one very similar story, which is really great for us and such a big opportunity to go to our customers with. This slide's interesting. This is more just, I guess, to kind of understand where the industry as a whole thinks that ransomware is going next. And when I first looked at this page, I was like, holy crap, we think that it's going to bankrupt more businesses and it's going to be erasing more personal data than ever. But when you really start to look at the things you guys are predicting that this is going, it starts to get really quite dark and, evil. And I don't really enjoy thinking about it too much, but, ransomware getting to the point where it's able to get into our critical utility infrastructure, so our power grids, our water supplies, that, rather than actual physical war, it all just becomes cyber war where, different nations are hacking each other and trying to shut off power grids and water supplies and things like that. And this one just blows my mind the most over here on the left, evolved to the point where artificial intelligence is beyond human control. So ransomware just becomes this life of its own, and it just becomes a part of our daily lives. All of those make a company going bankrupt, to me, sound like the best case scenario, even though it's obviously still an absolutely shocking outcome from ransomware. But, when we speak to all you guys, this is kind of where you're predicting that it will go. So not only is it on the rise, it's also going into so many different other areas that we haven't even started seeing yet. And on top of that, you guys think, and we think as an industry, that it's going to get personal. So currently there's a lot of talk around, you know, hacking businesses and how businesses have to report every time they're hit by ransomware or crypto or whatever it might be. But we think that it's going to go a step further, and it's going to become a personal thing where your wearable devices, your Apple Watch, your Fitbit is going to be encrypted. Medical devices that you have, you know, if you're a diabetic and you have to, you know, prick yourself to feel your blood pressure, like that can be hit by ransomware. Eventually self-driving cars, Internet of Things, you know, we're currently seeing that the Internet of Things is definitely a reason that ransomware is spreading in the way that it does, just because now everything has, you know, aligned to the internet. But we're predicting that it's going to go into social media. It'll just go absolutely everywhere that's online. So I guess in terms of painting the bigger picture when we're talking to customers, it's like, look, this is where we are right now, but this is probably where it's going to be over the next, you know, 2 to 5 years. We need to be doing everything that we can right now. Otherwise, you know, a few years from now, it's just going to blow out. So some really interesting statistics that have come out of this. But this is where we really start to get into the meat of it. So we ask MSPs every year, from your own experience, what do you think is the most effective solution or prevention for ransomware when you have to look at your entire stack? And for 2 years in a row now, the number one thing that's come out of it is business continuity and disaster recovery solutions. So having a BCDR solution in place with your customer. And the reason being is that a ransomware attack will inevitably happen. There is no 100% safe and secure strategy to protect yourself from ransomware. So the absolute best thing that you can do is to ensure that if or when it does happen, you can get that client up and running in no time, to the point where some of the employees might not even know that they've been infiltrated or hacked. Now, second, which is quite interesting because it plays on what we were discussing just before, is the employee training piece. So actually educating people on what to do and what not to do, and in the event when something does happen, what you should do then, followed by, you know, keeping everything patched and up to date, antivirus, so doing as much as you can on the preventative side, as well as having a unified threat management platform. So I think this slide really highlights that, you know, when you're thinking about ransomware protection or putting together a ransomware plan for your customers, it isn't just, you know, one solution that you can drop in and you're good to go. It's going to be a stack of different solutions, educational pieces that you need to go into your customers and talk about, because there is no, unfortunately, there is no just one solution that's going to do the job and, you know, prevent as best as we can from being hit by ransomware. So we're going to start getting into now the complexity side. So there are many different aspects, like we just looked at, that make up a ransomware response plan. And this is an awesome slide if you want to take another snapshot or get it off me after this presentation. These are the kind of 5 different areas that we look at when we're thinking about creating a ransomware response plan, because it is more than just BCDR, it is more than just patching. So, you know, you want to start with prevention always. So, you know, patching, making sure your employees know what they're doing, but then you also need to be able to detect the ransomware. Once it's detected, how do you communicate that? How does your client reach out to you if they think that they've been hacked? How do you, or when do you reach out to your client, and what do you do to tell them once they have been hacked? Then, you know, we want to understand, how did that happen in the first place, to make sure that you can, or to ensure that you can do everything in your ability to make sure it doesn't happen in that same way again. And then obviously the recovery aspect as well. So once you are infiltrated or infected, you know, how do we get these customers back to production as quick as possible? So these are kind of the 5 different areas of the puzzle that you should be thinking about when you are putting together a ransomware response plan. And we will delve into those little bits in a second, but that kind of brings me out of the security chunk. And I do want to jump straight into the complexity piece. And this is the part where you can really go to your customers and the stories that you can be telling them, and essentially a bit of an insight into what they're feeling as well.
Yeah,
so
actually,
as we've seen,
just to jump in, we had a couple quick questions on the previous slide, actually.
Okay, yep, let me just go back.
Yeah, so
Oh,
so just like while you get there,
oh,
um,
oh. Just going forward, not backwards. Okay, yep. Yep.
awesome. Yeah, so I think I love these points. I think this really articulates a really good practice as to how you can really think about this more cohesively. I think so one of the key ones here, I think a lot of people understand employee training and that type of thing really helps you kind of get to this point. So how are you seeing MSPs pitch this type of solution? So do you see people kind of bringing these in as individual solutions, or do you bring them in as a kind of a cohesive package or a strategy that kind of brings them together?
Yep.
And are you finding that different sizes of companies or different verticals, perhaps of the actual SMBs themselves, do you find that they need different types of packages or different needs? And what are your thoughts on those pieces?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually threw this exact same question out to our advisory board and some of our partners quite recently. And to be honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There wasn't just this is the one way you should go and approach it. Some of our partners who have jumped on this straight away and kind of, I guess, been a bit on the front leg have started packaging it into their MSA agreements. It's a part of the package. It's the all-you-can-eat package. Because of the notifiable data breach scheme as well, we want to make sure that we've got this kind of stuff documented and that we've got it all, ticked off in the case, a really bad case where maybe you're even audited. We've got this ready to go. So it's just another line item on their managed service agreement. Yep. But on the flip side of that, we've got some partners as well that are building this out in a way that it's standalone. So you've got to be thinking, like, if you look at your own MSP today, right now, is this something you're not offering? And if you aren't offering it, then it's an opportunity for another MSP to come in and offer it over the top of you. And you think about the kind of plan that they have to put together. They've got to go into that client's business and understand every aspect of it. So they can start poking holes at the business. They'll start seeing places where maybe there could be some improvement or technologies or solutions that they could offer. So we've got some partners that are actually going out and building a go-to-market offering just around this whole, ransomware response plan and compliance bit, and charging, that as a completely separate one-off kind of thing. And I guess just to mention, you said, is it different per vertical? The answer to that is what we're finding is 100% yes. So some of our MSPs that we work with, purely deal with accounting firms or, just dental practices and whatnot. And depending on the industry that you're in and depending on how sensitive that data is, especially when it starts to get into, medical records, tax file information, like the perfect information that if someone got their hands on it, they could steal your identity. A lot of our partners in that space are making this compulsory, and whether they're wrapping it into their current managed service stack or they're going back to their clients saying, hey, look, we're going to have to spend, some time doing this now. We need to charge you X amount of money, but in the case that you are hacked or audited, you're now compliant and you've got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. So yeah, there's a few different ways that we're seeing our partners kind of go about capitalizing on this whole, building response plans for their customers.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yes, I think the MSP, a lot of MSPs I've worked with definitely do, the detection, the recovery, the prevention. I think the really interesting one on this slide, I think, talks about the cause assessment. Originally, if you were looking a couple of years ago, I think MSPs were more of the mind of let's just fix it and kind of move on. But I think, as you mentioned earlier, around the ways that people are getting breached, like the more you understand the cause, and yeah, it is a bit of an investment in terms of doing that research, but it can really help you understand and educate or address the root cause as to how they came in. So along the lines of medical records, actually, a relevant question that just came up is, so in the United States, there's a regulation around healthcare records and that type of thing called HIPAA. Do you have anything on the horizon for Australia that's anything relevant, that's specific to healthcare records, that's maybe even more stringent?
Yeah, so actually funny that's been brought up. So outside of the general like data breach scheme that we have, which is across industry, it's, you know, kind of pretty much any operating business, there's currently a royal commission into aged healthcare. It's actually on one of the slides a little bit further in the deck, but currently they are being absolutely drilled. Like every aged healthcare is being audited, third parties are being audited. We've got some partners who are working with clients currently who are being audited because they provide third party services into this kind of like health space. And, you know, for any Aussies on the line, you would have seen what happened with the Royal Banking Commission that came out last year in our banking sector, and the onset flow and effects that are coming from that in terms of regulations and standards. So right now, like as of today, nothing that I know of, but I can only imagine that once this Royal Commission is finished in aged healthcare, from some of the findings that they're even, you know, uncovering now, it would only make sense for this to start to become industry specific, especially in areas like health, where the data is just so confidential and private. You know, I highly think that'll be something that's on the horizon. And they've got them overseas as well. So I guess in one regard, we're a bit forward in that we did come out with this breach scheme, but yeah, nothing yet. But I could only imagine it's close on the horizon.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Tayler.
Yeah, cool. All right. Always moving forward. All right, complexity. So in light of everything that we've been through, and I know it's been a pretty quick deep dive, we could spend hours on just talking about, you know, the breach scheme, or hours talking about ransomware and the different statistics. But you think of that from a business owner, like we're kind of doing this day in, day out. We know what ransomware is, how it works, how devastating it can be. If you're a small business and you've just started really cluing on to this kind of stuff, like you're watching the news, you're seeing companies be fined overseas, you know, it is quite confronting. And to be honest, you know, when you think about small businesses, they have no idea. They probably don't have an internal IT person. They probably just have that go-to person that's probably pretty good with tech. They don't have the knowledge or experience to kind of get themselves through this, through the new regulations, through compliance, through general knowledge and education. So for them, this can be quite an overwhelming or scary time. And this is an absolutely huge opportunity for us as the managed service providers to go in and help them navigate this kind of path. Now, we estimate that, you know, the managed service industry today is currently worth around $40 billion. But in 4 years from now, it's going to be $72 billion, which I think just is an example of how quickly the complexity of technology, of the threats, of the regulations, of the compliance, like how much this is growing and how quickly that it's growing, that the industry is almost going to double over the next 4 years. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say like, how are we all going to, you know, get our slice of the $1 billion. They're big numbers. To be honest, I don't even really know what $72 billion is. Like, it's just such a large number. But this statistic demonstrates that our industry is on a rise, and that more than ever, people are going to be turning to us as the thought leaders and the experts to be able to help them navigate through this huge space. So in terms of capturing the share of the market in what this is in the growth, like the exponential growth that's going to be happening over the next, you know, 2 to 5 years, we kind of see it in two different buckets. So as an MSP, you need to figure out what your differentiated approach is to set your business apart. So, you know, maybe you are only servicing dental practice and you are absolutely, you know, everything back to front in dental practice, cybersecurity, or maybe, you know, it sounds like the Australian Football League in Australia needs someone to specialize in that realm. So maybe you specialize per vertical, or maybe you become the go-to person around the notifiable data breach compliance. Like, you specialize in being able to ensure that businesses tick off all the things that they need to be doing to ensure that they're compliant. There's a few different, you know, ways that you can go about doing that, but just finding something that you're the best at, that you are the go-to person for it. And then on the other side of the plus sign, the committed partner bit. So teaming up with vendors and partners that are able to help you do more. And I've been at the IT Nation Evolve, or formerly HTG, meetings for the past week, and the APAC director for that, Stu, put it absolutely perfectly yesterday in one of the sessions. It's, you know, we're in this together, in that as an MSP, if you didn't have the vendors, like the technology, the technology bits, you wouldn't be able to provide that to your customers, and essentially wouldn't, I guess, have a business in that regard. And on our side, the vendor side, you know, if we didn't have you guys going out there and implementing and supporting our products and services that we create, we wouldn't have a business either. So you need to find vendors that are 100% in on the partnership, obviously providing great technology that's going to help you navigate this kind of tricky path into cybersecurity as it grows, but also vendors that are going to listen to your feedback, you know, vendors that are going to provide you, you know, collateral and content that you can go and speak to your customers with, because, you know, you have to be in it for the long haul with this. Cybersecurity is not going away. So you really want to align your business with vendors that are really going to help you through that and help your customers through that as well. And you should be ruthless with it, to be honest. Like, if, you know, you're not impressed with something, you should let us know. It's interesting in that, you know, the vendors, or I say this from my own perspective, you know, I do a lot of research into all of this kind of stuff, and Datto in particular spends a lot of time and effort trying to understand the trends that are happening through this channel report that we do every year. So we can, you know, do these webinars and tell you guys the kind of trends that we're seeing on a global level, because a lot of the time they might trickle from the US into Australia and vice versa. We can sit here and talk about the trends that we're seeing amongst our partner base. But at the end of the day, you guys are the one in the shop front doing this day in, day out. Like, it needs to be two-way as well. If there's something that you're seeing that maybe we haven't caught on to, or if anything that I've said in this presentation, you're just sitting there being like, nah, that's not working. You know, I've tried to have these conversations. That's not right. Like, you need to tell us that as well. So I think you should, you know, hold us to a really high standard in terms of how we are supporting you. And I always want feedback as well. So anything in this presentation, even if you want to throw it in the chat or message me after, being like, you know, we have those conversations, but we find this works better or whatnot, I'm always interested in hearing that. So in terms of, you know, putting together those ransomware response plans, just once again, it is multi-pronged. And from a vendor perspective, there isn't just going to be one vendor that you can team up with to do all of this stuff. So, you know, just sitting down and having a look at that 5-point plan, and kind of going, you know, how do your vendors sit into each of those buckets? How are they helping me in the cause assessment or the communication or the prevention or whatnot? And just really try and understand, you know, maybe there's one of these buckets that you don't really have a vendor that's helping you with. And maybe that's something you need to go look for or ask around or see if it's something that you can be supported with. But I want to jump into the opportunities today, because I know we're starting to run out a bit out of time. But the first thing, and if it hasn't hit home already, ransomware response plans, like providing this as a service to your customers, which have to include employee training. You know, the ABC released this article this week, and, you know, it's right in line with that. This is becoming more mainstream. It's popping up more in the news, more online, more in our papers, that cyber attacks are increasing, and the biggest problem is you. So if you're a managed service provider and you're not providing education and training to your businesses, you're really missing out on a huge opportunity, not to be providing just value to them, but also to hopefully be lowering the amount of ransomware attacks that you have to deal with. Some of our partners in Australia team up with third parties who are, you know, specifically going out on the road to deliver face-to-face cybersecurity training, or even online training as well. And if you can tell them this story about, you know, if you get breached, there's a 33% chance that it was someone within your own organization that made it happen. You know, it's almost a no-brainer to get the education done. So that's a real opportunity. And whether, you know, you build up those capabilities in-house to be able to go out and deliver it yourself, or you build some content, or you enlist a third party that, you know, you can either send out their online training or a person to go to each of your customers and actually deliver that training face to face. A huge value add opportunity there. And then specifically with the compliance and system vulnerability checks. So we mentioned before, you know, there was the Banking Royal Commission. There's now the Aged Care Royal Commission, which falls under the larger bracket of health. Globally, we are starting to crack down on kind of people saying that they're going to do something or that they are compliant and that they're not, to the point where Australia released the Essential 8 is what we call it. And it's the 8 things that you 100% should be doing to try and minimize the chance of a ransomware attack. So you have the opportunity to go into your current business or into new business and sit down and say, hey, whether or not you charge them for it or you include it in your managed service agreement, that's something we can talk about more or take offline. You know, these are the 8 things that the government set out that you need to be doing. And if you're in an industry that's regulated, like health or finance or banking, you know, this is pretty much, you're expected to be doing this. Let us go through and tick or cross whether or not you meet all of these requirements. That is something that you could provide in a 2-page report that's literally, you know, tick, cross, and outlining what it is that they do in each category, and you can charge for that. Another great thing about this is that it'll allow you to go into those businesses and find and poke around and see if there's any holes to be able to even maybe upsell because they're not doing multi-factor authentication. Personally, you know, I'm not an expert in all of those 8. I know on number 8, daily backups, that's, you know, exactly what Datto's bread and butter is. But, you know, on the daily backup side in itself, you know, it needs to be minimum once a day. It needs to be off-site, and ideally it needs to be image-based that can go through instant virtualization. So you need to, I guess, be going in and having these conversations, and it might even uncover for yourself areas where you can upsell your clients to take on, you know, new and better technologies to be able to meet these requirements. And I've included this, the URL again at the bottom. If you want to take a screenshot of that, it'll take you to the Essential 8 and it'll break it out a bit more as well. And I guess just some insight from our partners. I know we've got partners who in their managed service agreement stack, for example, you know, Essential 8, number one, 2, and 8, for example, they're standard. Like, you don't have a choice, Mr. End User, you have to have 1, 3, and 8. But look, we want to look at also implementing for you 2, 5, and 7 to make sure that you are in line with the Essential 8 released by the government, as an example. So, and I just wanted to share this with you because it came across my desk literally this morning. One of our reps at Datto has a partner based out of Victoria. It was it's in the health sector. They were hacked yesterday, or sorry, not yesterday, they were hacked 3 weeks ago, and they lost 15,000 medical files. They didn't have a backup and DR solution, and they've estimated that it's going to take them over 12 months to be able to sift through all those files and get them back to a point where they're usable. So I think sometimes we think that a lot of, you know, businesses, even health providers or these bigger firms are doing this kind of stuff, but they're not. So these guys have just called up Datto. I don't think they ever want to go through this again. So they're going to implement a BCDR solution. But these are the kinds of stories you need to be sharing that's happening. This happened in Victoria literally 3 weeks ago, and it's had a devastating effect on that business. And, you know, it's not going away. If you literally type in ransomware attack in whatever country you're in, you will get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of news articles that have been happening over the past 12 months. You'll be able to find one that's specific to the customer that you're going to talk to. So I would walk into every meeting just being equipped with a couple stories that you can share with them, just so they can relate to that and it can become more relevant. So in terms of final takeaways, you know, you need to prepare and have that front line of defense ready, which is going to include, you know, employee training. You know, making it mandatory would be the absolute best case scenario, but you really need to start having that conversation with them to help, you know, minimize the amount of ransomware attacks that they'll be exposed to. You know, leveraging multiple solutions to prepare for the worst. So that relates back to that slide where it's no one solution is going to prevent a ransomware attack. It's going to be a combination of BCDR and AV and patching and education. So going back and having a look and making sure you can provide all of that. And you must ensure, and it's just time and time again, it comes out in these reports and statistics, that you need to have a BCDR solution in place. Like if your customers are still running on tape or doing daily backups that aren't off-site, or it's not image-based, you need to go back and have that serious conversation with them on how devastating it can be with their business, because it's bound to happen one day that you get hit by ransomware, no matter what you do. And if you can't get back to production, it's essentially going to screw over your business. And in the worst case scenario, it might even put you out of business. And then finally, you know, businesses, as in your customers, the end users, they need that dedicated cybersecurity professional that they can lean on. And that really does need to become us in the channel over the coming years. So making sure that you are up to date and you have that basic understanding of, you know, the laws and regulations. We're not asking anyone to be a lawyer or in compliance, but just being able to know and have those conversations around what it is that these end users need to be thinking about is going to be really important in educating and being that thought leader in the space and the person that these guys can turn to for help. And I can't finish this without quickly mentioning DattoCon. So, you know, this is me pulling statistics and information from just a few different places, but every year, once a year, well, twice a year now with the European conference as well, everyone gets together for 3 days, and essentially it is a deep dive. There is information left, right, and center around what partners are doing to capitalize on cybersecurity, how to package and bundle it. So if you haven't considered going to DattoCon, I would highly recommend it. Reach out to me if you want more info on it. I can run you through exactly what it is. And if you are on the call and are interested in going, feel free to fling me an email and I can see what I can do to help you get you there. And then an absolute final thing to leave you with, additional resources, you know, some very basic ransomware education for employees, some little presentations around, you know, defending Office 365 from ransomware or whatever it might be, some case studies. All you need to do to get access to these things is email tools@datto.com. You'll get a bounce back email, bit like a holiday responder that's going to give you free access to a lot of these tools. And if I could ask a favor, if you could make the subject line something along the lines of Tay or Taylor's great or something like that, that would be awesome, because all of these emails go to my boss, Rob Ray. So it'd be really nice for him to know that I am trying to do my job out here in Australia, because he has to forward them on to me personally. So that's it from me. Anything, feel free to reach out to me personally. I'll share the deck with you guys. I know we're hitting it for time, but I don't know if there's any questions, or I can hand it back over to you, Pat.
I'll just take a look through the questions, but it doesn't look like there's any at this point. So we can probably, if anyone has any at this point, feel free to jump into the Q&A box or the comment box, and we can definitely go over them over the next couple of minutes. I just guess as we wrap up, you know, the last but not least, just wanted to really quickly mention on the Auvik side, if you're not an Auvik partner today, and would love you to take a look and doing a quick demo at auvik.com/ransomware19. We'll give you a $5 Starbucks gift card, because I think there's a lot of really interesting ways that Auvik can also help you out in the ransomware world, understanding what's on your network, you know, what devices are using default credentials. I think there's quite a few opportunities that we'd love to chat with you about. So just while we wrap up, and I'll go to the questions in just a second, those of you that have to drop off now, thanks for joining us on our To Protect and Secure selling cybersecurity as a service with Datto and Auvik. The webinar will be recorded, as I mentioned, and it'll be posted up on auvik.com/frankly-MSP just in a few hours. And I want to really thank you, Tayler from Datto, for joining us and sharing these really good insights. And there's a lot of awesome takeaways here. And feel free to join us after the call on our Frankly MSP community. It's up on LinkedIn. That's a great new space for conversations and resources. Really help to make MSPs run a more efficient IT business. So there's a great opportunity to jump up there. feel free to add in any more recommendations or questions, and we'll post a link to it in the panel as well. So at this point, I'll just go ahead and jump into any questions. And again, thank you again if anyone has to leave right now.
Cool.
So far, no questions. I think we definitely did a good job, Tayler. So hopefully, you get some good emails to your boss on this.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll go ahead and stick around for just a minute, and then we'll go ahead and close off.
Yeah. And if you're in Oz, it's lunchtime now, so go grab something good to eat. I know I'm pretty hungry.
I had to Google some of those restaurants you were mentioning earlier that got breached.
Oh yeah. Oh, so no, Bunnings is a big warehouse store in Australia, but they're famous out here for doing barbecues on the weekends. So like you'd bring the family and you'd have the barbecue out the front, and a sausage and bread would be like $2 and a can of drink would be, $1 or something like that. It's just, it's one of those weird things in Oz that a Bunnings sausage sizzle is what we'd call it. Like everyone would just know exactly what that is.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, it looks like we're good on questions here. So I'll go ahead and stop the broadcast now. Again, thanks again, Tayler, and a copy of the recording will be posted on our website shortly. Thanks, everyone.